Party's not a party's a man who fights crime, and we're gonna watch him fight for a minute at a time with John and Niall and a guest who doesn't rhyme. It's Bat Minutes! Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Bat Minute and Robin. This is the podcast where we hate uninvited guests, but we love talking about each minute of Joel Schumacher's 1997 film Batman and Robin, 1 minute at a time. I am one of the hosts, Niall McGowan.
I am your other host, John Parker, and I do hate uninvited guests. That's very, very true. But, that's why we decided to fill the show up with invited ones now.
Yeah, it'd be really weird if one of the guests was uninvited, was somehow managed to intercept the feed.
We should do that as the finale of the season. Just put the Zoom link out on Twitter and see who turns up.
Ooh, that's not a bad idea.
Oh dear, don't do that. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
But of course, our invited guest today, you might have just heard, is author and academic Anna F. Peppard.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I was going to say, because we had earlier in the movie Pamela Isley doing like doctor. She made a point of saying it that way. And you're Anna F. Peppard, PhD. So that is that you are a doctor then.
I am a doctor, but yeah, not the kind of doctor that makes money or saves lives. Unless I'm saving lives by doing things like teaching superhero movies and comics, which, maybe I am. No one can know that I'm not.
I think you are. I think that's saving people culturally.
Yes.
It's important.
I was just trying to work out whether I prefer, if I were to have a doctorate myself, would I be the type of person who's like up front, like I'm Dr. Niall McGowan, or would I do like the kind of, Agent Mulder and Scully, FBI, where you're like, Niall McGowan, PhD.
Yeah.
Throwing it at the end, they're like, ooh, that's actually, I thought you're just some guy, but turns out now you got letters behind your name.
You can have a double whammy, because as a big nerd, of course, I love my wrestling. And the AEW Women's Champion is Dr. Britt Baker, DMD. She's got both. And she is really a dentist as well as a wrestler.
Oh.
Wow.
And ask Andy if there's any damage done to teeth in the ring. She's like, wait a minute, I got this.
Does she have dentistry as part of her gimmick? Because that's a pretty good gimmick.
Yeah. She made that part of her whole character. It's like she wears like an adapted dentist's coat to the ring that's all snazzy and bejeweled and stuff.
That sounds awesome.
Oh, nice. But yeah, like you've got a book out as well, Supersex, Sexuality, Fantasy, and the Superhero, which is like a curated collection of different essays and stuff about sexuality within comic books and stuff.
It is indeed. And discussion of the Batman's penis controversy of 2018 begins on page 8, relevant to your listeners. Some discussion of Batman throughout that book, including appearances in porn parodies, which sort of relevant to the queer subtext of this particular film.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, we have dealt with the fetishistic aspects of Batman in these movies many times, and throughout this week it's going to come up again because it's all over the place. And I'm kind of curious, like when we get to like covering the Nolan movies in some respect, it's like, does he suck all the fun out of them, where it's like there's something kinky in here?
No, we're going to find it. We found it in scenes that we never expected in these four.
Yeah, like that's sort of my feeling about this movie in general, is that I spiritually really want to love this movie. I'm all on board for Camp Batman. I'm all on board for Kinky Batman. And yet there's just something missing from this movie that doesn't make it have a warm place in my heart, but we could talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's probably down to George Clooney.
I won't lie, upon rewatching this movie for the first time in 20 years, which I did for the first time, like I did a few days ago in preparation, I did have the strong feeling throughout watching it that Clooney is the problem with this movie, isn't he? I mean, the rest of the movie is on tone, and it's just, he's standing out, and he's just not, as they say, he didn't understand the assignment.
No,
Exactly.
not at
Yeah.
all. And I tried to defend him when we started this season. Didn't I, Niall? For like 2 weeks. I was like, no, he's okay. He's okay. He's all right. But now, no. He ruins half the
I
scene.
was just sitting, looking at you, trying to punch your way through that diamond wall, going, there's no point in trying to defend Clooney in this, John. There's nothing redeemable about it going on here.
And it's a shame. But that's what we've got to work with. He probably thought, well, I'll be the straight one, so to speak, in a very queer camp movie. I'll be the straight one. It'll be fine. It'll work. No. And he's not even playing it 100% straight. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's just that if it was one or the other, it would work. Like, I could almost get it in kind of like a clone culture thing where he's so straight that he becomes queer coded through that straightness within the context of this space. But that's just it's not going enough in either direction to kind of be successful for me.
No.
But speaking of all that, though, we are today we're here to talk about minute 76 in particular of Batman and Robin, which opens with a snowman sauntering off to his duty, and it ends a minute later with some masked manhunters looking for a beauty. But yeah, so I do like the little momentary exchange at the beginning of this minute, because it has, Ivy sending Mr. Freeze off to, like, you go do this. And as he goes, she gives him like a little knowing smile. I'm choosing to believe that's because Ivy's just really into manipulating people. Like, that's her whole thing. Is that you can, literally pheromone people into doing whatever she wants. The only person she couldn't do it with was Mr. Freeze. And now it's like she's literally almost like patting him on the ass. Go like, go on, go do that. And he jumps to it. And she's kind of like, I got him. I got this guy now. Like, he's working for me all of a sudden. Like, I finally did it.
Well, am I reading too much into it that because he's in his weakened state from his imprisonment, she is exercising more control over him than she used to? Or is that giving the movie way too much credit?
No, I think that's pretty accurate. Like, she has got him sort of over a barrel now. So she's she's manipulated events to where she shouldn't even need the pheromones. She's like, oh, I got him. And then she's going to continue throughout, the next couple of weeks to like, well, how can I get him to keep doing what I want in the midst of everything? And that's going to be through, killing Nora and everything as well. Well, attempting to kill Nora and whatnot. But, for sure. Definitely. I'd say that's totally true.
Well, I mean, there's something going on for me with Ivy in this movie. And I mean, it's such a big topic. I could talk about the Poison Ivy stuff just for like 4 hours. But it's just that her character sometimes for me isn't one way or the other enough either. It's hard to understand her motivations in this movie. And I get you can chalk that up to being, and I'm doing this in air quotes, she's just crazy. And that's kind of what the movie falls back on. But she
women
wants
be
to
crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Like, she wants to manipulate men, and she has this kind of sexual fascination with Freeze because he rejects her. And I get the tropes that it's playing with here, but it's trying to do a few too many things and doesn't have sort of a firm idea of what it's doing with this character in terms of the type of sexual threat that she represents. And I find that a little bit frustrating.
Yeah, Ivy's a really fascinating character throughout all this, because again, she's, in some ways, some people will have found her sort of be empowering, and in other ways, she is like the most tropey and the most like falling back on like old. There's the kind of there's a femme fatale quality about her, and then the manipulative, home wrecking woman, because she's literally going after this guy trying to kill his wife to get so she can have him for herself and all this kind of business. And yeah, she really is in a kind of crossroads a place.
Yeah, I defend that though, because to me it's a very interesting reason why she's doing it. It's kind of because like the magic doesn't work on him, so it's kind of a challenge.
Yeah,
and I find that interesting, and I like the way he's not really interested in her. It's got that Sweeney Todd kind of thing going on, like I mentioned with Mrs. Lovett. But he spends half the movie flirting with people as well, which makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I feel like the sexual subtext of the movie, like my complaint about it would be that it's a little bit all over the place, which can be sort of a way that people like this movie because there are so many different points of affiliation that you could have with this movie because it's confusing, because that's kind of like the nature of a cult movie, right? There are all these gaps and spaces of possibility, so you can kind of turn this movie into whatever you want it to be because a lot of it just doesn't make any sense. So like, I'm not even ragging on that. I love that about cult movies, and this movie definitely has a charm in that sense for me. But I think I don't know. It's hard to kind of articulate my complaints about Ivy without kind of getting into the huge sort of cultural text that is Ivy and sort of her sexuality and her relationships, and obviously the fact that she is canonically in comics a queer character, and that's not something that we have mobilized in this film. She definitely has like the drag performer thing going on in this film, but in terms of her being like a lesbian character, that's very much kind of erased from this film. She's very heteronormative to the extent that sort of all of her motivations involve sort of pleasing men and taking control of men, and I think that's part of what I find a little bit disappointing about this portrayal.
I wonder why that was the decision. Do you think it was just Hollywood at the time not wanting that in a big budget movie, or what? Because Joel Schumacher would have put that in if he could.
I think it was almost like there was a trend in the 90s to have like, she had things like, you know, you had like Fatal Attraction and Disclosure. There was a lot of like crazy women victimizing men going on in the 90s. I don't know what brought that about culturally. But she could almost be an extension of that same thing of like, yeah, she's a crazy lady coming after the men. You're like, that's just the way things are now.
That's the perfect chance to slip in at least like references that she could be bi, maybe. You could, something. Anything.
There's nothing in this movie. And that really stood out to me, like in terms of all of her motivations being sort of man focused. And again, there's like a queer subtext to her to the extent that she's clearly like performing an exaggeration of femininity. But I mean, it's very much more in conversation with like, to me, like a drag performance than like sort of a lesbianness to her. Like, I think the way they're kind of doing it. And again, this is a queer movie, but for me, it's a bit more of like a gay male movie. And like, that's sort of maybe part of what's going on here, just in terms of the types of kind of like kinks and gazes that are being prioritized.
Yeah. We've had people on saying that they're to that kind of point, like that it being like a male gay movie, like it does seem like, well, the threat looming in it is like aggressive heteronormativity, where these two guys are out like they're having a great time out this in their rubber suits, beating up other guys, and then there's like this woman coming in to like break them up and stuff. It just seems
she
like
ruins it all.
yeah. Although at the same time you have Mr. Freeze and this whole thing is like, I just need to get my wife back and all this, so he's going in. There's also a weird thing just in the beginning of this minute in terms of what was in the original script, and it's in the novelization as well, where they once again changed the dynamic between the villains to make them more friendly with each other. Because this scene originally was supposed to take place outside in Ivy's car, where it's absolutely stuffed to the gills with flowers, which would have been a hilarious, visual of Mr. Freeze in that suit, just like crammed into a back seat surrounded by flowers while he's on death's door and stuff. But at one point then they move the conversation from Arkham, where he says I have to rescue my wife, and she's like, you never said anything about a wife. That occurs in the car, but he mentions like, yes, I need you and Bane to go get my wife, and she's like, you never said anything about a wife. And then he grabs her by the neck and crashes her against the window and says, you will rescue my wife.
Whoa.
And then she's like, okay, Miss Ivy to the rescue. Where will I find your brittle bride? And then the scene goes on. But that was the same thing, remember, with in the screenplay for Batman Forever, like Two-Face and the Riddler were supposed to hate each other.
Yeah.
And then in the finished movie,
in real life, they hated each other.
yeah. And then in the finished movie, they're like, oh, it seems like they're kind of good buds. Like they kind of take all that out. And this now, I don't know if it maybe Joel Schumacher felt that was a bit uncomfortable to have like, active violence against a woman with Mr. Freeze grabbing her by the neck.
You could keep the idea and have him not actually physically attack her. You could still have the kind of uneasy alliance.
Yeah. But they seem to change it into really like, as soon as she shows up to rescue him, they kind of get on. And then it's very much more that Ivy's the aggressor and that she's the one who, lies to him, says, that Batman killed your wife and stuff like that. Makes her out to be much more of the villain, where he remains relatively sympathetic then, because, well, at least he didn't, grab her by the throat and bang her against a window and stuff. He just wants his wife back and stuff. So.
Well, that gets back to what you were bringing up before, which was what I was going to mention, that there is cultural context for sort of that anti-feminist, anti-woman backlash in the 90s. I mean, that was when we saw a really definite backlash against sort of the gains of post-wave feminism, and it was caught up in the culture wars in the US and all of that stuff. And I can very much see this portrayal of Poison Ivy being in conversation with that, to the extent that she's a very empowered woman, and I think there's a lot of scenes in this movie that are very empowering, and even some grain of her mission is empowering. She's taking revenge for gendered violence that she experienced, and that's all fine. But then you have this thing at the end, which you're sort of alluding to, where she becomes increasingly less sympathetic, and Freeze is sort of upheld as the more sympathetic figure. And that's sort of the biggest problem I have with this portrayal. So you're getting at something that was sort of, one of the issues I had with Ivy in this movie.
I can see that. Because, as it goes on, it kind of is like, well, you were a bit sympathetic to her earlier, but just so you're aware, she is crazy.
Yeah, it's the most frustrating part of it is that because this franchise has already done that story well with Catwoman in Batman Returns, where at the end you were 100% on her side, and it was just like this great tragedy that things went the way they do. Whereas in this, you're like, oh no, she's a bad guy, and she just needs to be taken down, put in Arkham Asylum. Like it's as simple as that. There's no more complexity to it.
Well, that's the nature of these two Schumacher ones. Probably not his fault directly, but simplified. I think you used the right word there.
Again, we talked about 120 episodes about his mishandling of Two-Face, where it's like, this guy could be the greatest tragic villain. He has been portrayed as the most tragic villain in Batman's whole rogues gallery, and yet he's just zany clown, half a face guy in this.
Actually, when you mentioned just before Nora Freeze, right? Because we haven't actually sort of delved into it step by step. When we see her at the start here, after Ivy sends Freeze off on his little errand, we see her in the tank, and my question is so does she just not age in this tank? Are we getting a cross between Demolition Man and the frozen head of Walt Disney?
I think it is. She remains the same. I think it's they had the whole thing. I think we mentioned it in the New 52. Their interpretation of Nora Freeze was that she was frozen in 1943, and then when she gets years later, decades later, Mr. Freeze, he's obsessed with her because in that version she's just a test subject that he's working on, and then he sort of becomes enamored with this lifeless body.
I kind of like that though, because that's extra creepy.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely. It's an interesting route to go with it. But that would flat out say, she is eternally preserved in there. She's never going to age. She'll just constantly remain the same, and in a state of arrested development, basically.
That is weird.
And they don't make it clear within the context of this movie whether she consented to this, right?
No. It's
I always assume any version of Nora did not, but it doesn't say. No.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to gauge time. How long has he had her frozen? In this movie, it could be 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's the thing. It just seems to be this Mr. Freeze's crime wave seems to be very recent, but then how long has he been Mr. Freeze? How long has he been building up to doing all this?
He's just been hanging out, as Mr. Freeze, and then it occurred to him that hey, I'm a supervillain. I should probably act on this.
Yeah, 2 years later, hang on, I could be committing crimes.
Yeah. But I mean, the consent stuff is weird in the sense that, she's in this tube and she's in the flowy dress and everything. So did he knock her out and put her in this dress and then put her in the tube? There's a lot of questions. And I don't I'm not saying I have a problem with it to the extent that I think it's supposed to be creepy, and that definitely communicates the creepiness.
Well, that's a good question though, because it is you get that, the euthanasia, controversies in reality is a whole big debatable thing. I was always under the impression that Nora was just she maybe was even in a coma before he decided to put her in the fluid.
Yeah.
But still, there could be a thing of she could get revived and been I don't want to be preserved until for 5 years or whatever. I'd much rather you let me die naturally than what you've done to me and stuff. But or even at that, too, she could be she could be in there longing for the escape of death, because she's I'm just floating here. I can't do it. This is horrible. This is a nightmare.
Well, that brings up an interesting question of, is she not conscious, but is she aware?
That is the question.
I'm going to assume not, but I also just have to add that I'm getting really distracted because I have like the frame, like I have the still right now of Nora Freeze in the tube, but it also has Batman and Robin in the side view, and I'm just like, sorry, this is going to take us in a whole different direction, but I'm just like staring at the bat nipples and like realizing the ways that the chest design of like the Batman costume is different than the chest design of the Robin costume, and I'm kind of hypnotized by it. Like Robin has like higher, tighter pecs.
He does, yeah.
Like that's, I appreciate the care that went into that to have their bodies express their different personalities through their rubber pecs.
He's got a differently shaped six-pack as well,
Mm-hmm.
which I've never really noticed until you've made me look.
This 36-year-old Batman is supposed to be over the hill, so he's a bit saggier, you know.
Yeah.
Oh God, I'm approaching 36. Don't say that. Don't say that.
I'm older than that, don't worry.
But here's a question though, and again in regards to Nora Freeze, because she's obviously one of the most like well-regarded thing about the Mr. Freeze character now, because the insertion of her in the animated series really revived him and made him give him so much pathos and all this business. Like, oh, he's got this tragic backstory, and like, oh, him and Nora, this great love story. But yet, is she not essentially the like a literal definition of the fridging trope, where her only purpose is to, if people aren't aware what the fridging trope is, it was a thing coined in the 90s by Gail Simone, where there was an issue of Green Lantern where he discovered that his girlfriend had been dismembered and put in the fridge for him to find. And it sort of it began this discourse talking about female characters whose only purpose is to exist to provoke reactions in the male characters and to spur their story forward rather than having any stories themselves. And they would see that Nora Freeze, for all the praise that Heart of Ice gets, that's what that is. Like, she is literally in a fridge, and her entire purpose is, well, she's the motivation for this guy.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think yes, but with because it's supposed to be creepy, right? And it is supposed to be sort of a critique of the ways that he is preserving her in ice to preserve something about his own identity. So like in that sense, I think there's a complicatedness to it that like it is that trope, but it's playing with that trope consciously, if that makes sense. It's tough, right? Because I mean, different people are going to interpret it a different way. And I'm 100% sure there are some fans that are like, this is the world's greatest love story. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the intent. It's like gives Freeze a grain of sympathy, but a grain of sympathy in the sense that he's pathetic and flawed, and not like I agree with what he's doing, because that's quite different. Because I mean, obviously what he's doing is monstrous. Like, it is a huge part of the ways in which he's villainous. The fact that he's doing this, the fact that what he is doing is clearly deranged. So, but again, I totally think there are probably fans who sort of take it in a different direction, or like, oh, this wonderful love story, if she just wakes up, they can be happily ever after. And I'm like, I don't think that's the intent. I think that it's playing with that trope in kind of like a reflexive way, but that's sort of my read on that.
Well, that's why I really liked the comic book story from the past couple of years where she does eventually get revived. And she turns into an even bigger villain than him and just dumps him. It's quite funny.
Well, yeah, there's no way to kind of do the story where she gets back together with him after waking up, because that would confirm the badness of the trope. She has to leave him in some capacity.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, because they do have in the dialogue, they're talking about like, oh, she has McGregor syndrome. How coincidental that I think maybe down the line it might be revealed that someone the Batman and Robin knows also has McGregor syndrome. But her case is too advanced. Like, he's cured it in the early stages, but she's too far gone. And like you saw, well, maybe someday with more research, and looked into, because as the comics and the animated series, in particular, the continuity that birthed Nora Freeze, as that's continued on, they actually did have a whole thing where Nora Freeze was cured. It actually occurs at the end of the animated film Sub-Zero, which was the thing that was supposed to come out in conjunction with this movie, but then the critical mauling of Batman and Robin had them push it back to 1998 because to sort of get a bit of distance from it. And it was a point of contention at the end of that movie that Nora Freeze gets an organ transplant and a blood transfusion, and she's revived. And like her and Mr. Freeze are separated. He's off, in the Arctic, alone with his 2 pet polar bears that he has. And but she's at the end scene is him seeing on the TV that she's alive and she's gonna be fine, and he starts crying a little bit and goes off to be by himself, and it's sad and stuff. But the thing is, so that movie I found out was written by Boyd Kirkland and Randy Rogel, and with no real creative input from the main team of Batman the animated series was Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, and apparently originally it was supposed to be that Randy Rogel's been interviewed recently, and he said that they were actually making a tie-in movie to Batman and Robin, and it was all going to be about Bane. And then Warner Brothers said, "They've cast Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze. You got to make a Mr. Freeze movie now." And they're like, "But we've got the script written. It's about Bane." And the studio literally went to them, "Well, can't you just get on the word processor and just replace Bane with Mr. Freeze? Like, search and replace all." And they're like, "No, we'll have to write a new script."
It completely ruins the character.
But at the same time, you might recall in the new Batman Adventures, it was coming out, when they revamped the animation and stuff, there was the episode Holiday Nights, which we reviewed for the Patreon, John.
Yeah, I remember that well.
That's adapted from a comic of that also did all those stories, but they also had a story in that called White Christmas, which was all about Mr. Freeze going out and he creates a giant snow machine and he's going to freeze the city and all this kind of stuff. But it turned out he was doing it in memory of Nora because she was supposed to be dead. And it was like the end scenes, like him in the cemetery next to her grave and stuff. And they were planning to put that in the animated episode. And then Bruce Timm heard down the line, like, "No, Nora Freeze has been revived in this movie you're making." And he was like, "What?" So, and apparently, again, he had a lot of problems with this, where Tim said, "The one story point that always kind of sticks in my craw is that they brought Mr. Freeze's wife back to life. That's something I would never have done, because in my head, she was dead. She wasn't like preserved or on ice. She was dead. So to me, bringing her back to life, even though they did it for poignant reasons, it kind of made sense in the story that they were telling, but it was like, well, that's Mr. Freeze's whole thing, that his wife is dead. He's frozen emotionally because of it. Well, now she's back to life. It's like, well, now what is he? So that was weird."
Yeah.
And yeah, it does feel like after that too, when it gets into the Mr. Freeze episodes in the new Batman Adventures, he is just like, I'm just angry at everybody, and I'm just freezing people now for the sake of it, and I've lost Nora, but when you rob him of that motivation, the character is completely untethered all of a sudden.
Yeah,
and
I don't know. See, I like the idea that maybe she's dead all along.
Yeah, well, it could be, that she's...
It's madness. Like, he can't cure her. She's dead. I think that would be quite cool.
Yeah, it is quite telling, too, because in the Heart of Ice episode, this floating Nora in the tube isn't there. It's just like he's doing it in memory of Nora. And then it's only in the second episode where they're like, "Oh, no, we've actually got her body here, and you could potentially revive her." So it does seem to be like the kind of cross purposes with the writers of these stories in the 90s, where they're like, you got the guy who was writing, one of the main creative forces behind that episode going, "I thought she was dead the whole time." But apparently now she's not.
Shame.
As long as we're talking about Freeze, can we talk about like his base of operations in this minute?
Oh yes, the Snowy Cones ice cream factory, of course. Yeah.
God, this like base of operations is great. Like I have it on a still of that right now with the big, lever that's like heat cold.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. That's the technology. Hot, cold. There's no in between. You just pick one or the other.
So good.
Not even a thermostat.
I know. It's just one or the other. It's so good. But I mean, to the degree that I have an affection for this movie, it is definitely with those direct calls to 60s Batman, and the set design is very, very lovingly recreating that atmosphere here, and I really appreciate that in terms of the hideout. I mean, I'm looking at it and it's just all these different sort of textures of silver, and they've got some sort of like psychedelic patterns projected on the steel girders and stuff. I actually think this scene in particular
is one of the closest to 60s Batman. Like everything about the way it looks, the metal walkways they're going, the lighting, the colors, everything.
And they've got the tilted camera too.
Yeah.
It's even the acting of Pat Hingle and the other policemen, because as soon as the smoke comes out, they go, "Oh!" You can almost hear that from the 60s show of like, "Oh, the villain's attacked. Oh, who's let off this gas in the room?"
Oh yeah, that's great. So yeah, when he when he flips the switch, and we
Mm-hmm.
get some amazing ADR going. Ah, my lungs!
My lungs. That was so good.
It's really like, too, you can tell that's a post-test screening thing. It's like, so why are these guys falling down? Like,
Yeah.
they're supposed to be freezing their lungs. Like, you didn't say that in the...
I know, like, it's weird, isn't it? Because it's quite obvious that it's meant to be like a kind of nitrogen gas or something that's freezing them. But clearly some test audience member was just like, I don't know what's going on.
It's a bizarre scenario, because it's like, okay, so he goes in. I love that he enters through the exit door, which is, he's so much of a bad guy. He enters through the exit.
He's villainous. Oh my God, how dare he break convention.
But yeah, within this giant ice cream factory, they literally have the heating is either heat or cold. And
Why would you need
it's like,
heat if it's an ice cream factory?
why would you need the entire room to be covered in nitrogen gas like, at any point? That doesn't make any goddamn sense. It's not like the ice cream factory is like, oh yeah, literally every single thing has to be frozen within it at all times. It's like, it's just in the machinery, in the fridges and stuff.
No, that's how ice cream works now. When you get ice cream home from the shop, do you not freeze your whole house?
Oh, that is true.
That's what
Yes,
I
I do end up.
Have you ever eaten that liquid nitrogen ice cream?
No.
Wait, this is a thing?
Yeah, that's a thing.
Oh my
Yeah, I
God, okay.
remember doing it at science camp when I was a kid, but I think that there are places now where you can like get it, and it's sort of, oh, I'm not a science person, I don't know how this works, but they basically pour out some liquid nitrogen and make you like instant ice cream, I believe.
Oh, that's
Ah.
amazing. That's so cool. The only weird thing, because I love ice cream, it's my favorite food. The only weird thing I've had is that that like astronaut ice cream,
Ah,
Mm.
yes.
which was
Also
was
an
fine.
experience.
Yeah, it was okay.
I think though, if I had nitroglycerin ice cream, like, because I always associate that with Terminator 2 and the T-1000 getting frozen in it, so I'd have to like smash the ice cream or something and go like, hasta la vista, baby.
They should have done Terminator branded version in the shop.
They should have, but it's not too late. Whoever owns the rights, get out there. Who was it, Orion or someone back in the day?
It was back in the day. I don't think they're a thing anymore. But there's a lot of branding they need to do, things like that. When I was a kid, one of my favorite things, they did Turtles pizzas.
Mm.
But for some
Oh,
reason,
yeah.
they were in the shape of a turtle's foot. And I was like, well, the turtles don't eat pizzas that shape.
Yeah, you just make it the shape of a turtle shell. Like, it's close enough. Like, you're there. But we'll say though as well, because we obviously get Pat Hingle doing some great work as per usual.
Oh, hell yeah. He's
but-
great in this whole week, I think.
The guy next to him though, who's doing some fantastic exaggerating cough acting. Apparently, this is an actor called Bruce Roberts. And he's credited as handsome cop,
Okay, let's take him in. Let's
I
have a
think
look.
that's the thing though, because he's also in Batman Forever credited as handsome reporter. So I think
Okay.
it's like a little joke between him and Joel Schumacher.
It must be right.
That's
'Cause
amazing.
I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be mean about anybody. But he's not that handsome to me. To me.
He is not handsome at all. If you go on his IMDb, he's just like the most normal, looking kind of guy in the world. But he's only had a handful of roles. He's also in Phone Booth, that's Joel Schumacher as well,
Oh, yeah.
where he's just credited as reporter 4.
Oh, handsome reporter 4, surely. Come on.
I don't know if maybe Joel's like, this is a serious movie. All right, we're not doing the handsome joke anymore. Or maybe they had a falling out over the years, and he's just like, I'm not even going to call him handsome in this one. But his first role was in Crybaby, the John Waters movie.
Oh, God, I love Crybaby so much.
Yeah.
Even if
Oh,
it
great,
now
great.
stars Mr. Cancelled.
Yeah. And he's also in The Sopranos. There's a major IMDb mix-up where they've got him credited for 440 episodes of Home and Away,
Whoa.
the Australian soap. And I was like, what? So I looked this up, and when you Google his character in Home and Away, it's a different actor called Bruce Roberts. So that's obviously an IMDb glitch that's just gone unreported for years, because the guy playing that guy in Home and Away, he is quite handsome. So,
Maybe that's
I don't
what it
know
is.
if
They thought they'd hired him for this.
And like, maybe it was a fluke last time. Maybe he was having an off day in Batman Forever. We'll get him back in for handsome cop.
Now, I don't ever want to shame anyone or be mean, though. Like, I'm sure someone thinks he is handsome.
Oh, totally. I'm sure he's probably happily married for many years.
Yeah.
But one major thing he was in was the docuseries From Earth to the Moon, which starred Tim Daly, of course, the voice of the animated Superman, and Lane Smith, who, of course, was Perry White in the Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman, which I know you have a deep affection for, Anna. So
I do indeed.
I'll make sure to mention that there.
Well, but I don't know if it's the same for both of you, but that was my Superman.
Oh, totally.
I'm not saying it's the best Superman. It was my Superman. I grew up with it.
I don't think it's still the same thing of... I remember seeing when, Desperate Housewives came out. And apparently when that was successful, Terry Hatcher said she burst into tears because she was just so happy that she was going to be remembered for something else.
I get that. Even if you love what you did in Superman, it's like, come on, I need something else, please.
Yeah, but now that the time has passed, I do hope that Terry Hatcher is aware that not only will she always be Lois Lane to me, she'll always be the best Lois Lane.
Oh, without a doubt, she's the best Lois, yeah.
She was like the best thing in the show, quite frankly. It was like, everything else you can kind of take or leave, but she was the guy who played Lex Luthor. He was pretty good too. But
unfortunately, he's now crazy, obviously. But I did like Dean Cain.
Yeah.
Well, it's tough, right? I mean, the Dean Cain thing is, it's not great, but so like the cultural legacy of that show, I think it's a little bit like 60s Batman in that it's gone through sort of different eras of being kind of reviled and being more accepted. Because I mean, even the fact that Terry Hatcher and Dean Cain both had, roles in the Supergirl TV show. And now, of course, you have the Superman and Lois show, which very much seems like a cultural successor to Lois and Clark.
Very much.
And so I think the kind of cultural perception of it has changed a little bit. And definitely having gone back and watched Lois and Clark, like as an adult, like having not watched it since I was sort of 12 or 13, I went back and kind of watched it in my early 30s. And Terry Hatcher gets a lot of shit to do in that show. They do a lot of shit to her character, but she carries that show, like in terms of like her comedic timing and her passion and her ability to kind of combine that comedy and vulnerability with kind of the hard-nosedness of Lois. I love her in that role, and I hope that she does have a more positive view of it looking back, because it certainly had a big effect on me as like a 12-year-old girl, like a positive effect largely, I think.
Hell yeah. I mean, she as we said, she's doing the acting, she's doing the heavy lifting. Dean Cain's just there to look handsome.
Yeah, pretty much.
He is very much the eye candy of that show, to be fair. It's like, even then when they're making him dorky Clark Kent, it's like, no, he's still pretty dashing, like as a president.
That's my only problem with most Supermans, is they try and make Clark Kent look dorky, and it's like, he's handsome. What are you talking about? Come on.
Yeah. I think it's only really the guy currently doing him on the currently airing TV show was Tyler Hoechlin. He is great. But like, again, he's also too like, I don't know, he's just too good looking.
Just a sexy guy, it's like.
He's got at least like a grain of goofiness to him that like sort of makes it work a little bit. But like, I mean, well, it's always the problem, right? In a comic book, and they don't even do this in comics, but you could have the freedom because it's drawings to draw Clark Kent as very different from Superman. But in a film, it's like, it's obviously the same person. And you can't hide the fact that it's a square-jawed, muscular, attractive guy who just is wearing glasses and a suit now.
Yeah, like you're never going to hide the handsomeness of like Henry Cavill.
I did see a thing recently though where this great YouTube channel called Casually Comics, where this lady goes and deep dives into old comic book lore and stuff, and she's saying like apparently in like the 70s or so they tried to have a retcon for Superman where it was something to do with his glasses, that he was always emitting like some sort of low level hypnotism.
Oh yeah.
So when people actually, like, I think he asked like Lana Lang or someone what he looks like, and she gets her mental image of what Clark Kent looks like is this kind of balding, saggy, kind of really dorky looking guy.
I wouldn't have gone to that extreme. I would have just said he looks a bit more like, a bit more dorky, a bit more geeky, a bit more of a
I think it's not extreme, but it is mostly like he is a bit more of a schlub. Whereas then next to a picture of Superman, it's like it's two completely different people and stuff. And I think that was one of the things they attempted in the 70s. It just didn't stick.
I like
so
that.
They're like,
that's pretty good.
I mean, at least they tried something, and then if it's like, it didn't work, all right, people are happy with the glasses, we'll stick with it. Why not? But we'll say though, in terms of identifying people, I did think it was quite curious. Like, skip back a few seconds, when Robin and Batman they're talking about Nora Freeze, and then the pheromone dust sneaks in around them.
Oh, I love that bit. Yeah.
And they go like, oh, it's poison ivy. I'm really baffled by the pheromones in this, because I I'm assuming they can see it now. They see it leading down into the grate. But then,
okay. I didn't get that vibe. Okay.
Because you see later, I don't know if it's more like maybe it's there for our visual representation. Because later on, like when she blows this thing very blatantly in people's faces, and then later on, Bruce Wayne saying to Dick like she's controlling us somehow. And it's like it's the freaking pink pheromone.
No, see,
and then you think in this scene he'd be like, that pink dust clearly is something. Like they both see it and they know that it's her. They must associate this pink dust with her. Unless it's just a visual thing for us, the audience, and they can just like sense that she's nearby.
No, see, that's it. Yeah, this is what I've wrote down. I came to it from a different angle of I thought that the visual is just for us and that they can smell it. And my sort of question was going to be, does it have an actual smell? Not just working on the brain and the body. Like they can actually like sniff it in the air, like ooh, that's that smell, A bit like in a cartoon when they smell a pie, and they start floating towards it. You can see the smell lines coming.
Oh, I love that. If they get their toes start going and they both start floating down.
My next question was, what do you think she smells of? Does she smell plant-like, flowery? Does she smell like a perfume?
Yeah, I assume she's got to be flowery, but I don't know. Maybe
a flowery perfume. I don't know.
Does she have an enchanting jungle musk?
Yeah. But see, plants, I find, smell different to perfumes. So I wasn't sure what they were going with there. But then again, I tend to, even if I'm wearing like drag or something, I wear very masculine smells. I only have like one perfume. I have a Britney Spears. So,
the rest of it's brute all the time.
So, yeah, my favorite is Spice Bomb by Victor and Rolf. Because I like the contrast of, you're in drag, but you have a very masculine smell.
Yeah. But that is a good question, because then would she be ethically against perfumes? Because I guess it's killing flowers to create a scent.
Well, that's the thing, yeah.
And you think she wouldn't need it. She has this kind of vibe that she's given off. Because we don't know if the pheromone's natural. We don't know if it's a thing in her glove, or if she's just naturally secreting.
I think it comes out of her flesh. I think I've said this before. That's my take on it, but I can see why you might think otherwise.
You were put on the spot, Anna. What would you say this version of Ivy? She is naturally secreting a pheromone, or do you think that she's chemically created like a web shooter scenario?
She's a scientist, so
that's the thing, yeah.
Yeah, I was reading it as that she naturally secreted it, but I actually would like it better if it had been something she created, because that would combine, obviously, her scientist background with the nature of her powers, and I think that would be kind of more interesting. But I was curious about the visualization of it as sort of sparkly pink in terms of thinking about kind of the threat that she represents, right? And what is this dust actually threatening to do to Batman and Robin? Like, is it threatening to feminize them? But if it's threatening to feminize them, like, in what sense is it threatening to do that? Because what her threat really represents is to the bond between Batman and Robin.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of layers of stuff going on there where it's like, because you mentioned it earlier, I think, like what she's threatening them with is like, I don't want to say heteronormativity, but heterosexuality, perhaps, because she's threatening the bond between them. I mean, that is what goes on sort of in this minute and the subsequent two, especially.
Well, in the whole movie, because we've talked about this throughout the show, which you probably haven't heard. But, Bruce has a relationship with a woman, but it's his beard.
Yeah. Very clearly.
Yeah. And it does seem like his whole thing now is that like he doesn't even have the psychotic compulsion for because in Batman Forever he got over at the end of that movie he's like, well, I'm not Batman, not because I have to be, but because I choose to be. So now it does seem almost recreational that him and Dick just go out in these rubber outfits and hang out with each other all night and stuff. So
just bros being bros.
Yeah, bros. They're just bat bros. And so it does seem that Ivy's sexual lust is the main threat for them. But then where would Batgirl come into that? Because then her and Dick are supposed to be an item as well.
Dick is clearly bi.
Yeah. Well,
he's Mr. Bi. Look at him. His whole vibe is bi.
Bi's part of his name, Rob.
Oh, there you go. It's in the name. He's got the little earring and everything. Well, he did. Yeah. It's great.
And Bruce is like, all right, I guess I'll accept it. It's like, she can hang out, I suppose.
Yeah. In fact, I'm watching at the moment for the first time Sense8, the Netflix thing. And there's a gay couple in that who've kind of just reluctantly had to accept a woman into their life as well, because she was the beard. But she finds out she's the beard and she's into it. So she kind of moves in and they're like, oh, okay. Like, there's a woman with us now, I guess.
That feels like a situation you could be like, you had to leave, right?
Yeah, well, they try, but he's a celebrity. It's very complicated.
That's definitely the vibe I got with the Alicia Silverstone Batgirl at the end of this film, because she gives them kind of the knowing smile, and like Batman and Robin are kind of on one side and she's on the other side. She's just like, I guess I'm staying, but yeah.
It's
she's the tough biker chick. Who's to say that she's even into guys? She's like, yeah, I go out, I meet my biker girls every night. So like, we can all hang out in the mansion together, though. In the meantime, why not?
Why not? Indeed. That's the power of this film. See, look, we're uncovering the truth.
Well, it's a space of freedom and possibility for her as well, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody finds themselves back at Wayne Manor.
Mm-hmm.
But here's one thing I will say, and it always works in films for me, for whatever reason. I just got the immense feeling of relief when Mr. Freeze gets those diamonds in and he lights up. And he has like, and you're like, oh yeah, now I feel relieved now too, because you were really, it was really getting to me how like in dire straits you were.
Oh, I love it. This big inhale, he did inhale. And now he's chilled to perfection.
Yeah, instantaneously. He's like, I'm like completely 100% again. Much like the gas coming in, instantly those guys are all down.
Yeah.
He's like, there's no time for gradual things, gradual releases over this.
I thought it was so cool. And that line, chill to perfection, that is a good one. I'll give you that.
That is, that is a good one. I almost wanted to have a little martini, though, to be like, hey, I'm back, baby. Although I'd have to ask, though, because this is going to get another rabbit hole now, because we're already gone through the pheromone debacle, where... it could be because Ivy's whole thing in the jungle was that she was trying to create plants that could fight back. Mm-hmm. Maybe the pheromone was in some way part of that as well.
Oh, that's a weird power for a plant to have, though. The plant, to defend itself, can seduce a human male.
Yeah, get anyone who's getting too... Maybe people who are aggressively cutting it down, it secretes a pheromone that makes them stop. So they're like, oh, wait, no, I love this plant now.
Yeah, maybe not sexually, but they're like, oh, I love plants.
Well, why not?
Well, why? Yeah, okay, yeah.
But the thing is, so Mr. Freeze needs these diamonds. They're in his suit. Do the diamonds run out? Like, diamonds are forever.
Oh!
So why would he be putting literally the hardest substance on Earth, and a thing that you think that cannot be depleted, puts that in a suit, and then he needs to like get new ones every once in a while?
I guess that's the power of the suit. It wears the diamonts down. I suppose
the idea that diamonds can be worn down, though, is just fascinating to me.
Well, that's how powerful the suit is. Like, it consumes them. It consumes something unconsumable.
Oh, it'd be great if he was just like leaving out like lumps. Oh no, because then the coal turns into diamonds. It'd be something that the suit was then like leaving out lumps of coal afterwards. He got reversed it somehow.
Like, comes out a flap on the back.
Yeah. He's left freeze droppings around everywhere.
They can follow them, find his lair that way. Yeah, I like that.
That'd be the same thing too. It's Mr. Freeze. That also did keeping track of Elliot Goldenthal's score there. And when they were like, it's Poison Ivy, I was like, you'd be more like, it's the Riddler, because that's the Riddler's leitmotif. And so like another Dave Goldenthal going like, look, guys, you didn't give me much time to do a score for this one. Okay, so
that's just
I've just used the old theme, all right? Yeah. So what are you going to do with me?
It's villain music. It's fine. It works.
Yes, that's who remembers 95 was 2 years ago. Who remembers the Riddler now? But yeah, that's all the notes I've got for minute 76. Has anyone got anything else for 76 before or shall we move on?
The only things I've got are largely uninteresting. Like, the draft is pretty much the same here when I went through it. It's just in a different order. They immediately find Ivy and Bane, which is coming up, and then we get Freeze stuff afterwards. That's the only difference. So, not thrilling.
But Anna, have you any other parting shots for 76? Or
Oh, no, not really. I'm looking forward to some stuff from the next 2 minutes, though.
Well, we'll head off then into the dark night. Anna, would you like to tell people where you can be found online or promote anything of your choosing?
Yeah, sure. People can find me at Twitter just under my name. I'm Peppard_Ann. It has to be boring because I made it for professional reasons. You can check out my book, Supersex, Sexuality, Fantasy, and the Superhero, wherever you buy your books. It's an academic book, but, Batman's penis on page 8, so, accessible to the public at large.
Oh, yeah. Well, we promote the academic books here too,
Yeah. And yeah, I've got a couple of podcasts as well. I've got a podcast called 3-Panel Contrast, which is a monthly discussion of comics classics, which you can find on all your regular podcatchers. And I've got a podcast called the Oh Gosh, Oh Golly, Oh Wow podcast, which is an issue by issue read through of the classic Marvel Comics series Excalibur from the 80s and 90s.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I'll write that down. We're doing that. We're listening to that one. And as usual, come and talk to us on Facebook at the Bat-Minute Listeners Cave, Twitter at Bat-Minute, Instagram the Bat-Minute, and what should I go with today? Head over to the Patreon, the Sleepy Charlie Media Patreon, where you can get wonderful bonus episodes for just $2, which helps us pay for microphones and hosting fees, and you get extra crap, extra nonsense, us talking about comic books and things like that. So do that, and join us again on Wednesday, when we will be back with more Bat, Minute, and Robin.
Next time, altercation with an abomination. 2 crusaders in cowls detect in a headquarters bowels and are confronted by Ivy's aggressive acolytes' howls. Things get insane as both bannerets battle Bane. But while the Bat throws fruitless blows at this ludicrous luchador, could the scent of a woman leave Robin, on the floor? Hooah! Nightfall is calling on Wednesday, Bat fans. But will you accept the charges? Same Bat Pod, different Bat Minute.
We'll be back.